Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Good morning, Arizona. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, with another very important subject. It is called Latinos Next Steps. Next steps in education, in health, and also on finances. This is a continuation of a recent meeting we had at Post 41. What a meeting. We had a lot of the community members. It was almost like a homecoming. Everybody knew each other. It was just an amazing time. I was really touched just to see the community coming together. And it was LULAC who hosted the meeting, and AARP was the sponsor. In reality, LULAC and AARP have been doing an event like this for the past, I believe, 3 years. We changed it a little bit this time, and we decided to gather to invite the community members, community leaders to enjoy a meal, to enjoy music, and then to have 3 keynote speakers with brief messages on Latinos' next steps, on education, health, and finances. I'm in the process of editing that video, and that video will be posted on AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, so that you can get a taste of what happened. The color guard was there, the national anthem, the keynotes, the music by Straight Up. That was the band that we had. It was really fun. As we engage in the conversation, feel free, those of you who were there, to make any comments about that. Let me introduce our guest. Let me start with el Dr. Felipe Gonzalez Castro. And Felipe, you work for ASU. Would you mind just briefly tell us, your title and who you work for?
Thank you, David. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and that session was just wonderful. It was so nice to bring lots of people together. I'm currently professor and Southwest Borderlands Scholar in the College of Nursing and Health Innovation at Arizona State University, the downtown campus.
Perfect.
And as a side note, I've been with ASU 2 times. I was there for 20 years in Tempe, went to Texas, came back. I'm happy to be back. And now in the College of Nursing.
You must like it.
I do.
And next we have Yoli Aleman Rodriguez. And Yoli, we've had you, I think this is like the 3rd time, and
Yes.
we are always glad to have you back.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes.
It's always a pleasure.
We wanted to have you at an earlier date, but even at the celebration, but you were in business trips, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. Welcome to our show, Yoli, and we're going to be asking you to provide some insights as to Latinos' next steps in finances.
Yes.
So, are you ready?
Absolutely. That is a key topic to plan for education for the children, to plan for the future, to plan for a standard of living.
Right.
And historically, Latinos are saying, well, we're going to wait for this to happen or that to happen, and then it'll happen later. But that later is now. So we'll
Right.
discuss that in a little bit of an extent
Of course.
shortly.
Welcome. And we have el Dr. Gabriel Escontrillas. Now, you go by Junior, I learned the other day.
I do. I make it very specific because my dad's still around. Thank
Okay,
God.
great. And now I want to give you the opportunity for you to tell us your title and what you do, but I know that you have a doctorate in education, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Welcome to the show, and just tell us just briefly about your title and what you're currently doing.
Well, thank you for having me again, David. I'm currently the founder and managing member for College Readiness Coach. It's a company I started a few months ago. And it's really a concierge service to help high school students get ready to go to college. So working with the family. But then in addition to that, I've spent about close to 20 years with Arizona State University. I also spent a little bit of time working with the Maricopa Community Colleges at the district office.
Wow.
With Dr. Maria Harper-Marinick, who's now the chancellor.
Yeah.
So I've had a great time in academia, and I'm now enjoying doing a lot more community-based work. But I still teach. I teach diversity in higher ed for ASU and healthcare for U of A.
Yeah,
So-
perfect. Now, one time, Dr. Felipe, you and I held a conversation at a restaurant, and I was learning about what a doctor does to a university. Sometimes you almost feel like you only teach, but it's way more than just teaching. Do you still recall that kind of conversation we had?
To some extent, we do lots of different things. They overlap. But to clarify, teaching is very important because we're bringing new knowledge to those that are then going to follow us. But we also do mentorship, which is a variant of teaching where it's much more a one-to-one, like an apprenticeship, but we focus on the scientific information and teaching them also how to do research, which then becomes the third big part of what we do. And research is really basically answering questions, generating new knowledge. There's so much that we still don't know, although we have so much information, but there's bits and pieces, especially for populations of color, Latinos, Hispanics, because there are certain things that we haven't been able to understand, and we need to do that in order to provide better services. So all of that is part of what we do. Actually, the last thing is administration. We do that too. So we do a lot, and we often work many more hours than the conventional 8 to 5. But we love our work because it has a meaning for many of us. And so professors, I think we're paid well, but the issue is it's per hour. It's not. The same thing, but that's not the issue. The issue is making a difference in the community.
Definitely. And I saw Pete Dimas, who also has a PhD, and you also shook your head about not just teaching. So welcome, Pete Dimas. You are working on an amazing series on history, and we'll get to that in just a bit. But welcome, and if you can tell us why you shook your head.
It's never just in the classroom.
Right.
Never just in the classroom. I spent 20 years over at Phoenix College teaching history, Chicano studies, history of the United States, history of Arizona, history of Mexico, which gave me a pretty good perspective on what has been going on. When I got my degree over at ASU, my degree was in Latin American history with an emphasis on the former areas of Latin America within the boundaries of the United States. That's the only way you could do it at that time when I went. I won't say how long ago that was, but my additional field was in social theory and additional skill in public policy analysis, which helped me learn how to ask myself questions, which of course never end.
Right.
So, yes, I'm retired from Phoenix College. When I went to the university the first time, I saw my first advisor there, and he asked me, why do you want to major in history? And I told him, because I like it. I'd already been in the Navy. I had experiences. And he said, my advice to you is to get out of history. There's no future in it for you. Very few of us are lucky enough to get paid for doing our hobbies. That was his...
Okay.
And of course, I figured to myself, why not me?
Right.
And which turned out to be very, very good for me, personally, besides the rewards of doing what I did, because since I'm retired, I'm still doing my hobby.
Right.
I'm not getting paid for it, but still
And
enjoying myself.
And you just shared with us the third chapter of an amazing series you're doing, a video series that you're doing. Thank you so much. Now, do you know other folks with PhDs that also got their PhDs on history here in Arizona? We know Christine Marin is one.
Christine Marin. And Christine and I were in the very first Mexican-American history class taught over at ASU. So we go back a long ways. And Chris went on to basically establish at the urgings or push, Professor Manuel Servin set up the archives that we have there, the Chicano collection over at ASU, which is a wonderful repository of information that historians and any other kind of social researcher should access.
Right,
Very fine collection.
Welcome and thank you, Pete. And we also have Frank Barrios. He wrote a book, Mexicans of Phoenix. So Frank also does a lot of history. I remember that you visited the AARP office at least, I would say, 2 to 3 times, if I'm not mistaken. You spoke on history of Mexicans in Phoenix. You spoke on the Grand Canyon and probably another issue that skips my mind right now. But Frank, thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for that book that you wrote. And thank you for always saying yes when we call on you. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for all you do, David, for helping the Latino community. And LULAC, I'm a member of LULAC, was very happy to be your partner on that event that we just had. But thank you. I have to, I'm not a PhD, but Dr. Jean Marin, who was one of the founders of Valle del Sol, he'd always say, soy doctor sin medicina.
Right. Yeah.
But he was a good friend of our family. And but I'm an engineer, and like Pete said, I went into engineering. I enjoyed it. Water engineer. I served in water all my life, and after I retired, I was able to do. I always have loved history, and after I retired, I've been involved in history, working with Dr. Dimas on many projects, and it's important. Especially, I have to. I know that this is one of the themes of what we're talking about, but it is so important for younger people to know the history of what occurred before, and to take pride in their heritage and in their history. That I can't emphasize, especially with the young people. When they take pride in who they are, that sort of sets the direction for their future. And again, that's one of the reasons I do a lot of history. I do presentations at schools for younger people to make sure they know that their contribution to Phoenix, to Arizona, was very important. And it's just a summary.
Thank you. You know, this is show number 32, and we've loaded or uploaded the first 30 shows on podcast. You can find them on podcasts on iTunes, Stitches, I believe it's called, in Androids. And we've been reviewing the history of Mexican Americans, Latinos, from the time even before Arizona became a state in 1912. And it's been quite a ride, and we've been following 4 tracks: your history, your health, your education, and your finances. So in any country, minorities kind of deal with these issues, right? They deal with their identity, knowing who they are, and for that you need to know your history. Minorities deal with access to education. Minorities deal with access to health care. And then minorities have to deal with the issues of finances. So we selected these 4 issues as 4 pillars that are so related to Latinos in this country, and that's why this show is built on that platform. We call it the AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection platform, to address these 4 pillars. And our hope is to contribute to strengthening the community and to know where we have been, know where we are now, and what's ahead. So basically, that puts us to today's show. That's precisely what we attempt to do as a follow-up, again, to that AARP LULAC celebration luncheon at Post 41. So rather than jumping into the subject, we are close to a break now. So let's take that break, and then we'll come back starting with health. Latinos' next steps in health. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection, and we are addressing Latinos' next steps in health, education, finances, and how knowing our history contributes to progress, knowing who we are and what we have been gone through, and so on. So let's start with Dr. Felipe Gonzalez Castro. And Felipe, you shared with us at the luncheon your insights as to where are we? What could you say about Latinos' next steps in the area of health?
Sure, and one of the ways to proceed is to contextualize health as something that involves more than just our individual personal biology. And of course, that's very important, that's central to medicine. But health is really contextualized in terms of the systems in which we live. And by what I mean by that is that one of the terms is social determinants of health. Health is the product of where you live, history itself, and other factors like social policies that provide availability of health services. So it's a big net. And so the notion of social determinants, a definition, is conditions in the environment in which people live that affect health, functioning, and quality of life, and the outcomes, which is whether you get sick or not. All of that, what we find in the society and in others, is that there are health disparities and inequities. And those are differences in two populations, let's say Latinos versus a comparison group, which is non-Hispanic white Americans, and on many different types of diseases, some of the principal ones being diabetes, conditions like obesity, cardiovascular disease. It's a little bit less disparities, but then addictions, HIV, AIDS, you name them. Most of the lifestyle diseases, there's inequities, and of course, people of color, including Latinos, are worse off than white non-minorities. And those are basically driven by economic conditions, but other surrounding conditions. So in summary, the social determinants of health means health doesn't just exist inside of you, it's a product of all the environment.
And I believe for the longest time, we've believed that it was more generic. You're sick because generically that's how you were born. Mm-hmm. You're saying that the area where we live, but who is involved in creating those environments? What are we supposed to do? I find myself in an area that is predisposed to there's a lot of contamination, this and that. So what is the solution? What is the next steps? Are we supposed to just get out of those areas, or can you elaborate just a little bit on that?
Well, the next steps are complex, but in boiling them down to simple efforts, one of them is really having more equity in resources provided to communities of color, including Latinos, and that includes African Americans and Native Americans, American Indians. The distribution of wealth is not equal, and it never will be, except that if it's too disparate. Some people have lots of resources and can enjoy good health, even if they have some pre-existing conditions, but they can manage them because of the resources. The opposite is you can be a person that lives in poverty or other background issues, and you can be very healthy, but the thing is, if you have no access to health care, you may actually die. And so those are the things that are out of balance. That balance needs to be improved.
Right. Frank, you have a comment?
Yes, I do. I'm the immediate past president of St. Vincent DePaul, and we are in the process of building a new facility to expand our dental and health medical facilities to help the poor. And minorities are a major part of the people that we serve and help. And and again, even though we're looking at a $16 million building we're putting up, and I can tell you we're just scratching the surface of the need that's out there. Dental health needs are huge, and families that don't have the funds are coming to St. Vincent de Paul. We have wonderful doctors and dentists that give all they can to help people, but more is needed. And we've at some point in our in this community, we've got to face this burgeoning problem. And all I hear from our state leaders is we need to cut taxes. But anyway, I won't get political.
So go ahead, Yoli.
I think as Latinos, we owe it to ourselves to be accountable for what we drink, what we eat. Just because we see sodas laying around, that doesn't mean that that's a replacement for water.
So that's something we can do as individuals.
Absolutely, as individuals. And diabetes is at an all-time high. Why? Because you're drinking sugary products this entire time, and your body does not know how to digest sugar.
Right.
The food that we eat, it's almost like the more manteca you add to the tamales, the more Mexican you are. And, there's foods that you can use as substitutes.
Lots of education on knowing what we're eating.
Start questioning what you eat.
Okay. Something that it doesn't have to wait for politicians, and that's critical that we have to do.
Exactly.
Obviously, there are the other, the society, the areas where we live. And is there like a coalition of you seem to be wanting to get engaged. Go ahead.
Start asking questions about what you eat.
Perfect. Definitely, yes.
So I'm not going to address the coalition piece, but I think I still speak with my friends about it till now. And I mean, anyone that grew up getting government food, I mean, what was one thing that was always in there? A block of cheese. So when you really, I think sometimes we have to think about what have we been conditioned, and I know we can do better. So that's not,
right.
I'm not challenging that piece. But I also do think about the reality for some people. So I always remember, and I'm not going to mention where, I would go into a market. You could get a candy bar for a lot cheaper than you could get a banana or an apple. The fact that they're overpricing even just fresh produce and making it unaffordable for people, I mean, those are some challenges that people do have to deal with.
Right.
Do you feed your family a 5 wet less, which unfortunately might be bad food? Yes. There's ways to go around doing it, but it's almost as though it's a challenge. They make it challenging for people to want to be healthy, challenging for people to actually be able to afford to be healthy. Mm-hmm. And those are some of the things that we have to really consider on how do we help our families become advocates.
Right.
A year ago, tomorrow's going to be a year ago that my mother passed away, but one of the things I learned was how can we in the Latino communities become our best health advocate? Mm-hmm. For a year, my mother kept telling her doctor, I know there's something wrong. I'm experiencing weight loss. The doctor's all like, oh, it's just your nerves. It's your nerves. Long story short, by the time they finally did it, she had a large mass. A few months later, she passed away from cancer. But I learned from that point is, how can we really instill in our children when we talk about education, become doctors? Right. How can we instill in our children to keep your language? It's okay to be bilingual. It's okay to be multilingual. Right. Because we need more Latinos that speak Spanish being doctors that can actually serve our community and understand where they're coming, the cultural differences.
Right.
But one of the issues here, teach our children to become doctors. And that is, one thing we need to really understand at the base is that, we're talking about education, but education is a political act. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about it. And just to give you some of the experiences in my life, when I came back from the service, I went to college, to Phoenix College, and my tuition was zero. Over the succeeding decades, it's become acceptable to not assist people in getting an education, the currency of social salvation, if you will. It's become, you have to prove that you're worthy of it, and the way you do it is to have your skin in the game, which means you have to pay out. And I recall when I was teaching, I had students who were working full-time trying to come to school so they could afford the tuition to get an education. So when we say, prepare our children to be doctors, I agree completely. But let's not forget the underlying political reality that people seem to think that it's impossible to have the issue of tuition for higher education come to the forefront. I think it's a critical option, especially for communities that don't have the resources to afford that kind of an educational endeavor.
It's so interesting. We started this segment with health, then we moved to education, and then we move to finances. So they're tied together.
I don't want children or any young youth listening to our show assuming that college or higher ed's not affordable. Because it could be more affordable. I'm never going to argue that. But we have a state that's reduced what they give to higher ed. We have a state that reduced all state funding from community colleges. We have a state that can't give enough to K-12. So, I mean, we have an entire system breakdown right now. But I also do want to make sure that we can, I don't know if we'll get into the finance piece of it, of how our families can prepare for college, and how one of the biggest things I always talk about is how can we really start preparing our kids through high school? Because part of it is when I say let's make sure kids know they can be doctors, is that we're having that conversation with them early on. Because a lot of times what we find, and this is where we're going to find the disparities even in gender, is that we're still socializing even girls to think differently. We're not telling them be engineers. You know, we're still telling them, here's some pots and pans, go play house. So how can we really break away from those social norms and start building our pipeline and our workforce development with both men and women and telling them this is something you can do? And then it's up to all of us here that have been around the rodeo for a long time to actually help them get scholarships, help them get prepared. Because one of my favorite things about the show, the Connect piece, is that to me, Connect is that we're building the capital, well, the cultural and the academic capital for our community. Because we all have to acknowledge that not all of us have the same academic capital.
Right.
You know, we all have different experiences. So that's what I like about this show is that I'm hoping we're uplifting our community by talking about our experiences.
Yeah, we're close to a break. Would you just make it brief, Frank?
Yeah, just briefly. I'm also a Phoenix College graduate, as Pete is, and tuition was zero. Today, there are kids wanting to be engineers and doctors are going into debt for the rest of their life.
Right.
And there's a lawsuit going right now by the Attorney General. The state constitution says education should be as free as possible, or very cheap, and it's not. There's got to be something done about the price of education, and there's many ways to handle it, but we make believe it doesn't exist. And these kids, many of them that are not doctors and engineers but get lesser jobs, can never pay off the debt that they're going in to get a college degree. Something's got to be done, and I'm not sure I have the answers, but we've got to start working on it. Part of it is the state of Arizona has got to fund education more than it has been.
Thank you. We're right at the time for our break, our second break. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We are addressing Latinos' next steps in education, in health, and financial security, and how knowing who you are, knowing history plays a big part in all this too. Before we move to the next issue, Dr. Felipe Gonzalez Castro, can you kind of wrap it up in terms of Latinos' next steps? What are 2-3 takeaways that we need to have in this matter?
The way that I look at it, all of these things that we've been discussing are interconnected. We live in a system of systems.
Right.
And the way to look at it is that there's 3 basic levels. One of them, and I agree, our health is our responsibility to some extent, but it's influenced by other things. And what I mean by that, we can make choices and make better choices or not so good, but we need the health education for people to know what those choices are. Mm-hmm. And then the social support to make the right choices. If people push you in one direction, whether it's family or advertising that pushes you in the wrong direction, or then we'll go up to the community level. If the conditions bias your decisions because you can't afford the good stuff and you have to buy the bad stuff, those are conditions that we also have to deal with at the community level. So the first level is the person or the family. The second is the community. And by that I mean communities can begin to try to empower themselves to make conditions better at the local level for themselves and for their residents. And that's where we can be very proactive. There's politics, but also health information that will help us organize our communities in the better direction. And then the highest level is social policy and the broader decision making, which is far from our hands. But we also have to be active in voting, in advocating for the conditions. One of the biggest, as you see now before our very eyes, is the Affordable Care Act, which provided insurance for so many, and now the active efforts to take it away from so many by the redistribution of wealth. And those are issues that are very important because they do affect many of us. Yet we have to advocate in the right direction, which is more health, more education, make it affordable, and improve the quality of life. And so at those three levels, we can all have a hand in one way or another to move in the direction of better health.
Yeah. And I mentioned to some of you that joined the luncheon that we wanted to address this matter because in 2018, we want to follow up with these matters, these issues that you are bringing forth. So thank you so much, Dr. Felipe. Let's come back to you, Gabriel. Education. I mean, we are kind of separating these things, but it's impossible to separate health from education, from finances, and even history, because let's face it, we still have issues of knowing our own history, knowing who we are, and feeling that pride and owning who we are. So these matters are very, very much linked to each other. Where are we in education? Where should we be moving towards?
Okay, so I do want to read 5 things. So the Pew Research Center, last July in 2016, they released 5 facts about Latinos and education. So I think these are 5 good bullet points that we can kind of have a discussion around. So the first is dropout rate in 2014. It dropped from 32% in 2000 to 12% in 2014. So that's from ages 18 to 24. Also, college enrollment. It was 35% in 2014 versus 22% in 1993. That's of Latinos in college, enrolling in college. However, there's still a lag. We lag other groups in obtaining a 4-year degree. In 2014, only 15% between the ages of 25 to 29 had a 4-year degree. Almost half of Hispanic college students attend public 2-year schools, 48%, which is tied in with the bullet right before that. And then the last bullet point, Latinos are less likely to have student debt. But I'll work my way from the bottom up. So one of the reasons they're less likely to have college debt is unfortunately not enough of them are going into college. Even though the numbers are going up, there's still room for growth. When we talk about community colleges and the roles of community colleges, I'm going to turn to someone that's worked at Phoenix College for longer because I only spent a year at Maricopa at the district office. But I mean, the reality is community colleges serves multiple purposes. There's the lifelong learners. That's a vital role for anyone at any age that wants to take a course on anything. There's the piece for educating the workforce. They have strong relationships with businesses around the community that just want to get their employees trained for something specific. Then the third piece is them being the bridge to a 4-year institution. And that's where we're still seeing that disconnect. We're not, the way the system's built, it's almost as though they're at fault when not enough students are transferring, but the reality is not every student is intended to transfer because they're there for different pieces that the community college is serving. So we have to be mindful when we think about that because it shouldn't be a negative on community colleges. Not everyone there wants to go to a 4-year university. A lot of them are getting there an associate, they're getting a technical degree, and that's going to better their life. Yes?
I wanted to add one other factor there that even if you want to go to a 4-year university, those first 2 years at junior college are like 5 times cheaper than the 2 years at a university. And if you don't have any money and you're poor and you're struggling, you really need to consider a junior college. It is immensely cheaper than those 2 years. You get just as good an education, much cheaper, and you're not in debt. So that's a big factor. I urge people who are struggling financially to consider junior college for the first 2 years. Then if they want to get then they can go to the university to finish up the last 2 years.
So when we talk about that, we also need to remember that the community colleges and the universities have very strong partnerships where you can actually start doing, there's your AGES, but there's a lot of bridge programs where it tells you you're going to have your map of study, and the advisors at the community college are going to help you take all the core courses that you need, your general requirements, so that you can have a seamless transition into a four-year university and finish that degree. What I tell high school students that I'm working with is apply to both. But as you're doing that, also make sure you're completing your FAFSA. A lot of students still have questions around FAFSA. Get your FAFSA done. Apply for as many scholarships as you can. And this is the same advice I gave my nephew a year ago. Once you've done all your hard work and you get what you get, then you decide.
Right.
But give yourself those options to see, can you afford it, can you not? Because your budget's not going to change.
Right.
So that was a reality I even had to tell my nephew, unless grandma just hit the lottery and I don't know about it.
Because of time, let's bring in the finances, Yoli. And I know that if you struggle financially, saving and having a plan, it becomes very challenging. There's the financial aid at the college level once you get there. But you seem to be an advocate for getting ready, making a plan so you can save. Can you share something on those lines?
Something very important, and when you were speaking about going into so much debt, is that most of the time the parents are co-signers into some of those grants and some of that debt. And what we don't think far ahead in advance is what happens when the student passes away. And knock on wood, the idea is for them to go on into life and be professionals. But the parents are left with that debt. So it is important for our listeners to get a life policy and back it up with that debt. So if $100,000 were taken to go to medical school, have a small policy, a term policy for that amount. The other area is that parents need to start at a very young age. As soon as the Social Security comes in the mail from the time that the child is born, is set aside $100, $200. What small amount the budget can allocate.
You seem to advocate for a percentage, right?
Yes, a percentage is very good, but just the planning behind it. Have something set, and it's non-negotiable. Because what do we want? We want our children to be successful. We want them to go to school. And the more you speak to a child about the educational plan that comes in the mail, and you review it with them, and that's what I've done with my nieces and nephews, and they've all gone to get their master's degrees and done very well for themselves. But it was those 529 plans that we started early on, and we're talking to them, and it was a conversation about what are you going to do when you go to college? It wasn't, are you going to go to college? But as far as Latinos, the question that you had prefaced before was, where are we as Latinos and where are we going, is to realize, David, that the government is not going to take care of us when we retire. That's a dream. That's not happening. The Social Security, as you well know, is getting smaller and smaller, and the retirement age is pushing back. What are we doing? And that's where the percentage come in. As soon as you, as a student, graduate, and you start getting your job, is to carve 10, 15% of your income. And again, that should be non-negotiable. You can use it in a rainy day. You can use it to buy a house, but most importantly, for retirement. And what also happens is that the plans when the young people get married and they start acquiring assets, they're doing it based on two individuals having an income. It's not just on one individual having an income. What happens when one of the individuals passes away and then the family falls apart? They lose the house. You can't continue a standard of living. So again, I'm a huge proponent of life insurance.
And again, I know a lot of people who do not make good money. So I always struggle with this. I mean, how doable is it? You seem to advocate for that percentage, which seems very doable.
Right.
Do you know people that actually do this? Because I always struggle with this issue. Folks do not make a lot of money. How can they afford to even think about making a plan?
When I mention 10 or 15% of your income, it's the same 10, 15%
Right.
for somebody that is making $20,000 a year,
Okay.
or somebody that's making $100,000 a year. So it's a standard of living that you have a pie of money, and you're going to pay your debt, you're going to pay your home, you're going to pay your mortgage, and you're going to pay your cars, but you carve out that 10, 50%. And it doesn't matter. But that's why I like to speak in percentages,
Right.
because everybody is different. Everybody has different income. And when you allocate a percentage of that income and it becomes non-negotiable, then you continue with that standard of living. What happens when the money's not there? You're not going to
Right.
count on that money. Why? Because it's been allocated outside. You have a plan. It's when you don't have a plan.
Right.
And now, a lot of us are in the sandwich generation where we're taking care of our aging parents, and then we have the children that are wanting to go to college, and you're caught in between. So that's where the planning comes in.
This is amazing. I just like the way that all this is tied together. You have your health. You wanted to say something else?
Yes,
We only have a few seconds, but go ahead.
I want to say, I fully agree with you. One of the challenges for many of our people, like my family, my wife came from farm workers, and they barely made it. And then we came from low income. But one of the things is learning things that we never had given to us, like financial planning.
Okay.
But the other thing is having a desire to grow, to be somebody. That dream is important to help propel you, because you'll face a lot of barriers. We have to teach our children to be gente que lucha.
Right.
Don't give up.
And I think that's a good segue to the next segment on really knowing who you are and being proud of who you are and owning who you are. So we'll be back to address the history component of all this. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back.
Welcome to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Educate. Celebrate. Connect. Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today is Latinos' next steps in health, education, finances. And now we move to history. It seems to be a little, unusual to connect history into this, but I believe strongly that it is so connected, because a lot of times as minorities, you're in a country that sometimes has difficulties that doesn't quite help you to know who you really are, to understand, to feel that pride. And I think I've known you two, P. Dimas and Frank Barrios, as historians, and it is unbelievable what I have learned. And I always see people that know their history, they're different. They walk different, they think different, they behave different, and it just does something to you. So can you help us understand? I mean, you went into this field, if you will, of history. How critical is history for you? How, and then for others?
Well, for me, it was liberating.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting when you start trying to figure out why. My dad came from New Mexico, and there the Nuevo Mexicanos never lost their political power completely, and it ebbs and flows. And
So they brought it in from the time that that New Mexico was Mexico. They
Correct.
kind of just continue it.
Right. It's continuing frontier people, which of course means more equality because you need each other.
Right.
Okay. And my dad's family goes quite a ways back. The oldest church in the United States, in the San Miguel Chapel there, one of my ancestors helped rebuild it after the Pueblo Revolt. And so there's a long history there. And as I was going to school, I was looking for that history, and it was never there. You know, you go to school and you hear about Hernandez Cortez, and so, And what else? Where are the Mexicanos? Well, there was the Mexican War, and what else?
Right.
But it goes. One of the things you should keep in mind is the importance of how people's self-concept is. We have Albert Einstein, who basically says it's I'm paraphrasing because it's been a while since I've looked at the actual statement, that when it comes to minorities and majorities, especially those who have suffered conquest, which is basically part of the process that goes with the Mexican, it says the winners write history and attach demeaning monikers to the losers. And this is bad, he says, but beyond that, the real debilitating part is those who are receiving these monikers come to see them as reality and judge their brethren by the same. In other words, Mexicanos come to, or anybody else comes to look at themselves as inferiors, or maybe those others are more inferior than me. It's a divisive sort of a process. So it's important to understand where you come from. And when it comes to the Mexicano, one of the things we need to understand is that that our history is right at the core of the transformation of the world. Because when you have the Spanish coming into Mexico, then you have the indigenous people coming, together. It rips apart some of the fabric. It's a reconstruction that takes place. But the transformation of the world economically that changes things comes through there. The mass amount of silver, everywhere you move north, silver mines, driving people to the north. That changes the world economy. It brings together the economies not only of the Americas, but also of Europe and also of Asia, because Spanish silver, really Mexicano silver, goes to China. So you have this tremendous mixture that takes place in Mexico, because let's face it, if you're after making money, you go where the money comes from. Right. And so you have this tremendous racial mixture that takes place in Mexico. Very, very important part of the evolution. Then when you come to Arizona, and Frank knows a lot of this, what's surprising is not so much that you have Mexicanos here. I mean, just look at the geography, Sangre de Cristo Mountains, San Francisco, Los Angeles. I mean, when I was a kid, we're going to Los Angeles. Oh, vamos para Los Angeles. And I said, well, where's that, I mean, so disconnected.
Wow.
But then you come to understand that the establishment of Arizona is basically the Mexicano. When it comes to the technology to survive in this environment, that comes from the Mexicano. It goes way back to the indigenous and Spanish background. To establishing the places of population, that's the Mexicano. To provide the core of the labor to develop Arizona to this modern society, that comes from the Mexicano. It always has been. And then when times are good, please come. When times are bad, you're the cause of our problems, go away. But it's a repeated cycle that's been going on for over a century. And so what you have is a situation where a group of people have been, their origins have been demeaned, and yet they're critical to creating what we have, today. Right. And so, that's very important, but even more so, because when we talk about 15, 20% of the college students, that's an improvement. Because I know I was teaching this stuff before, and it wasn't that good. But it's disastrous, because when you take a look at the demographic makeup of the state in the future, who's making up the majority? Right. And if you have a people who are not well-versed in what's going on, not well-versed in the finances, not well-versed in the politics, you can do all kinds of things to basically undercut the majority of the population, which undercuts the social structures of the society.
Yeah. I am so sorry to have to ask, we're running out of time, and I want to just give Frank an opportunity as well. I mean, you wrote a book, Frank, and how critical is history in all this? I get that point is amazing, and we're going to keep developing these issues in 2018. But Frank, before we have to go, would you mind?
Yeah, just add to what Pete said it very well about what happens. And what is it? The winners write history. And but it is so important for people to know of the history of the Mexican people. If there's a Mexican American who did something, nothing is said. But front page of an Anglo American did something becomes the front page. History is written about him. And I've had people actually tell me, well, the Mexican American did nothing for Arizona and Phoenix, and it's not true. What we need to do is point out, I do that every chance I get, and Pete does also, to let people know what the contribution of the Mexican American was to, I think one of the statements Pete made one time, Phoenix would not be what it is if it wasn't for the Mexican American. And in many ways, the history, those people that are now dead that contributed so strongly to this, to what we have today, it needs to be told, especially for the young people. They need to take pride on their past, on their legacy of their culture, and so many of them are told no, just like Pete said, no, you, what was it, some very famous president we had said they're all rapists and something else, but anyway, no, it's true that the history has been fantastic. Just recently, a book just came out on Enrique Garfias, the town marshal. He was like Wyatt Earp, but yet nobody even knew he existed until recently somebody looked into that history. That's what we need to do more of.
Yeah. You know, we are about a couple minutes. Why don't we just devote the rest of the time for final thoughts? We're coming to a close of the show. The year, I believe, it's been an amazing 32 programs. We've tried to gather the best folks that are versed on the issues that we have addressed. Any final thoughts? I mean, we will continue to develop these issues in 2018, but anyone?
What I take away from this is that we need to teach our children to be critical analysts of history, of finances, of their own health, and economics and politics. In other words, we're not here to tell them what to think. We need to teach them how to be very good scientists of reality and to make the best decisions they can. We don't want to force them into any profession, into any way of thinking, and even there's issues for another time about their own identity. But we need to teach them how to be clear thinkers, because in the absence of that, they will be marginalized and the victims of others who take advantage of them.
My message for finance is not to wait until the better job comes, not to wait for something to happen. Do it now. Start fresh. 2018 would be an excellent year to go see an agent, and whether it's finance, State Farm, it doesn't matter where, but get it done. The difference will be is that now you would have a plan versus not having a plan. Being afraid of not having money and doing nothing about it, it's not going to fix anything. At least you will know what steps you need to take to make a difference in your future.
I'll quickly echo what Dr. Castro said earlier. Make sure you vote. We can't continue waiting for people to make education a priority. Let's vote the right people in and make sure that we're voting in the priority.
We're at a crunch point in history. It's important for people to get politically involved, to deal with these issues, to have a say in how our future will develop, because we don't know for sure where we're going.
Thank you.
Just, I am very proud of being an American, but I'm also very proud of being a Mexican American. And we need to have that balance. We need to be proud of Americans. We need also to be proud of our heritage and where we came from.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all our guests. This was AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Have a great day.